We continue Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. In starting Lycurgus, yep, this is multiple programs too. There is so much uncertainty in the accounts which historians have left us of Lycurgus, the lawgiver of Sparta, that scarcely anything is asserted by one of them which is not called into question or contradicted by the rest. Their sentiments are quite different as to the family he came of and the voyages he undertook, the place and manner of his death, but most of all when they speak of the laws he made and the commonwealth which he founded. They cannot by any means be brought to an agreement as to the very age in which he lived, for some of them say that he flourished in the time of Ephetus, and that they two jointly contrived the ordinance for the cessation of arms during the solemnity of the Olympic games. Of this opinion was Aristotle, and for confirmation of it he alleges an inscription upon one of the copper quoits used in those sports, upon which the name of Lycurgus continued uneffaced to his time. But Eratosthenes and Apollodorus and other chronologers, computing the time by the successions of the Spartan kings, pretend to demonstrate that he was much more ancient than the institution of the Olympic games. Timaeus conjectures that there were two of this name, and at diverse times, but that the one of them being much more famous than the other, men gave to him the glory of the exploits of both. The elder of the two, according to him, was not long after Homer, and some are so particular as to say that he had seen him, but that he was of great antiquity may be gathered from a passage in Xenophon, where he makes him contemporary with Heraclida by descent indeed. The very last kings of Sparta were Heraclida too, but he seems in that place to speak of the first and more immediate successors of Hercules. But, notwithstanding this confusion and obscurity, we shall endeavor to compose the history of his life, adhering to those statements which are the least contradicted, and depending upon whose authors are most worthy of credit. The poet Simonides will have it that Lycurgus was the son of Prytanus and not of Eunomus, but in this opinion he is singular, for all the rest deduce the genealogy of them both as follows: from Aristodemus, Patroclus, from him Sous, from him Euripon, from him Eunomus, and then we divide Polydectes by his first wife, and Lycurgus by Dionysa, his second. Diucidas says he was the 6th from Patroclus and the 11th from Hercules. Be this as it will, Sous certainly was the most renowned of all his ancestors, under whose conduct by the Spartans made slaves of the Helots, and added to their dominions by conquest a good part of Arcadia. There goes a story of this king Sous, that, being besieged by the Clitorians in a dry and stony place, so that he could come at no water, he was at last constrained to agree with them upon these terms, that he would restore to them all his conquest, provided that himself and all his men should drink of the nearest spring. After the usual oaths and ratifications, And he called his soldiers together, and offered to him that would forbear drinking his kingdom for a reward. And when not a man of them was able to forbear, in short, when they had all drunk their fill, at last comes King Zeus himself to the spring, and having sprinkled his face only, without swallowing one drop, marches off in the face of his enemies, refusing to yield up his conquest, because himself and all his men had not, according to the articles, drunk of their water. Although he was just, we notice, some parallels, Old and New Testament as it's called, with that sort of story. And the fact that we're starting off with a genealogy, but unlike in the Bible, we're showing that, well, there's a difference of opinion, and we're admitting it in the same place rather than having to look at different parts, right? Although he was justly had in admiration on this account, yet his family was not surnamed from him, but from his son Eurypon, of whom they were called Eurypontids, the reason of which was that Eurypon relaxed the rigor of the monarchy, seeking favor and popularity with the many. They after this first step grew bolder, and the succeeding kings partly incurred hatred with their people by trying to use force or popularity's sake, and through weakness gave way. And anarchy and confusion long prevailed in Sparta, causing moreover the death of the father of Lycurgus, for as he was endeavoring to quell a riot, he was stabbed with a butcher's knife and left the title of king to his eldest son Polydectes. He too, dying soon after, the right of succession, as everyone thought, rested in Lycurgus, and reign he did, until it was found that the queen, his sister-in-law, was with child, upon which he immediately declared that the kingdom belonged to her issue, provided it were male, and that he himself exercised a regal jurisdiction only after his guardian, the Spartan name for which the office is Prodicus. Soon after, an overture was made to him by the queen that she would herself in some way destroy the infant upon condition that he would marry her when he came to the crown. Now, as I've said with some other stuff, and will continue to give examples of, I do not believe in such hereditary rule. Now, passing on of your property or estate or that sort of thing, yeah, but the hereditary, that governments are just, they sort of are, but it should be more about election of the people and their, to give right-wing values, their merit. What have they done? What have they not done? And, does this leave them a suitable ruler? But let's be real about it. It's, if you look at the ancestry of American presidents, even Obama was part of the same group. You got to find this same group in their ancestry. Abhorring the woman's wickedness, he nevertheless did not reject her proposal, but making show of closing with her, dispatched the messenger with thanks and expressions of joy, but dissuaded her earnestly from procuring herself to miscarry, which would impair her health, if not endanger her life. He himself, he said, would see to it that the child, as soon as born, should be taken out of the way by such artifices as, having drawn on the woman to the time of her lying in, as soon as he heard that she was in labor, he sent persons to be by and observe all that passed, with orders that if it were a girl, they should deliver it to the woman, but if a boy, they should bring it to him, wheresoever he were. And whatsoever doing, it fell out that, when he was at supper with the principal magistrates, the queen was brought to a bed of a boy. who was soon after presented to him as he was at the table. He, taking him into his arms, said to those about him, "Men of Sparta, here is a king born unto us." This said, he laid him down in the king's place and named him Carilaus. That is the joy of the people. Similar to omnual, right? In that way. Because that all were transported with joy and with wonder at his noble and just spirit. His reign had lasted only 8 months, but he was honored on other accounts by the citizens, and there were more who obeyed him because of his eminent virtues than because he was regent to the king, and had the royal power in his hands. Some, however, envied and sought to impede his growing influence while he was still young, chiefly the kindred and friends of the Queen Mother, who pretended to have been dealt with injuriously, her brother Leonidas, in a warm debate which fell out betwixt him and Lycurgus, went so far as to tell him to his face that he was well assured that ere long he should see him king, suggesting suspicions and preparing the way for an accusation of him, as though he had made away with his nephew, if the child should chance to fail. Though by a natural death, words of the like import were designedly cast abroad by the Queen Mother and her adherents. Troubled at this, and not knowing what it might come to, he thought it from his wisest course to avoid their envy by a voluntary exile, and to travel from place to place until his nephew came to marriageable years, and by having a son, he secured the succession. Setting sail, therefore, with this resolution, he first arrived at Crete, where, having considered their several forms of government, and got an acquaintance with the principal men among them, some of their laws he very much approved of, and resolved to make use of them in his own country. A good part he rejected as useless. Among the persons there, the most renowned for their learning and their wisdom in state manners was one Thales, whom Lycurgus, by importunities and assurance of friendship, persuaded to go over to Lacedaemon, where, though by his outward appearance and his own profession he seemed to be of no other than a lyric poet, in reality he performed the part of one of the ablest lawgivers in the world. The very songs which he composed were exhortations to obedience and concord, and the very measure and cadence of the verse, conveying impressions of order and tranquility, had so great an influence on the minds of the listeners that they were insensibly softened and civilized, insomuch that they renounced their private feuds and animosities, and were reunited in a common admiration of virtue, so that it may truly be said that Thales prepared the way for the discipline introduced by Lycurgus. And one of the things that we encounter is don't play these etymology games. A word means what it means, right? Daimon is the anti-personal self. You know, if you're male, it's the part of you that's attracted to the female, and anti-personal sounds like it's some sort of adversary or something, but that's not really what that means. And daemon, again, initially was a term for like these beings that are other, but they're kind of, they're like humans in some way. They're not quite God, but they're not human. There's something beyond human. What could be said, but from Crete he sailed to Asia with design, as is said, to examine the difference betwixt the manners and rules of life of the Cretans, which were very sober and temperate, and those of the Aeonians, a people of sumptuous and delicate habits, and so to form a judgment just as physicians do by comparing healthy and diseased bodies. Here he had the first sight of Homer's works in the hands, we may suppose, of the posterity of Creophilus, and having observed that the few loose expressions and actions of ill example which are to be found in his poems were much outweighed by serious lessons of state and rules of morality, he set himself eagerly to transcribe and digest them into order, as thinking they would be of good use in his own country. They had, indeed, already obtained some slight repute among the Greeks, and scattered portions, as chance conveyed them, were in the hands of individuals, but Lycurgus first made them really